Welcome in everybody to YBA Today here at our Natick Studios. I'm Chris Dugan here with our great four campers of the day. We have Max over here, Johnny, Dylan, and Lane. And today we are delighted to have special guest Barry Nolan in studio for a little news conference, interview style, for a great learning experience for these youngsters. Again, Barry Nolan, a media consultant and documentary filmmaker. Been in the business for many years. Barry, again, thank you for joining us today here in our studios. A very hot summer day, so we're very delighted and grateful for having you here. And I think we'll start off with questions right away. Johnny or Max, one of you guys want to take it away?
Thanks a lot, Chris. So, Mr. Nolan, it's an honor to have you here again. Thank you very much for coming in. So, I just want to know, you've had a great, successful career in broadcasting. What are you doing right now?
I'm working on a documentary film with my wife about this remarkable woman who found herself in an abusive marriage, and the courts gave custody of her children to this mean dad. And the only way she knew how to keep them safe was she ended up kidnapping them. And she made it to Amsterdam and became the first American to ever be granted political asylum on the basis of domestic violence. And she lived with her children in a refugee camp for a couple of years and finally was granted asylum. Lived below the radar for about 14 years, and then the FBI came knocking at the door. And by this time, her children had grown up. And they said, "My mom saved our lives, and we think she's a hero." So it's an interesting story that looks at a lot of issues, from domestic violence to the way child and family courts handles this depressing issue to be talking to young broadcasters about.
Yeah, a little bit, but it's good that the mom saved all their lives.
Yes,
great story.
It is. She's really a remarkable woman. And doing an interview with her lawyer over in Amsterdam that helped her get the asylum. We asked her to characterize this woman, Holly, and she said, "She is a lioness." And I believe each of your moms would be a lioness in protecting you were there any harm threatening you too. It's what moms do.
Yeah. Very interesting. But what I want to know is how this job compares to your past jobs.
Well, I spent most of my life working in television, and working in television is it has an enormous range of quality of life experiences. Sometimes you can work for mean, grumpy people and work very long hours and do boring stuff, or it can be the most interesting job you can ever have in the world. I spent a long time doing Evening Magazine here in Boston, and I worked with great people like Robin Young, who's still on the radio on WBUR, and Sarah Edwards, and really nice people. And our job would be to go out and do stories about programs like this, like the Young Broadcasters. And we get to talk to great young people like you, and or we'd get to talk to sports figures or people like the Hoyts. Have you ever seen the dad that pushes his son in the wheelchair in the Boston Marathon? Yeah. And so we got to meet great people like that, and we went around the world telling stories, and it was a wonderful experience.
Sounds great, yeah.
Sounds like an interesting journey. Now, Barry, I'm Lane Sutton from Framingham. What was your original idea of your career path, say when you got out of college, and how is it different from now?
I don't believe I had one. When I came out of college, I went straight into graduate school. And when I look back, I meet young people today that, maybe like you, that have a plan to, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to go to graduate school, I'm going to get this degree, and then I'm going to become a fill in the blank. And I see people like that today, and I'm so impressed by them, because I just kept sort of blundering along and following things that seemed interesting to me at the time. And I never had a plan to be in television, and I never had a plan to do this for 30 years, and just sort of one day found myself doing it. And it really worked out for me. But I suspect that almost anybody you talk to that has a career path, it really worked great once for them. But the way I did it may or may not work particularly well for somebody like Lane or Dylan, because they would have different skills and different things that made them happy.
Thanks, very interesting.
How did you get interested in broadcasting?
Well, originally, I was more interested in theater. I wanted to, I found it really interesting to be in a play and to work to try and make the play come alive. And there was moments when, I guess I started out in 4th grade doing a school play, and I thought, this was really fun. And I just did it because it was fun and it was social and it was I learned things about history and literature, and I really liked doing it. So I went into graduate school thinking I was going to pursue a career teaching theater history in college. But they started a theater company, and I ended up being chosen to be part of it. But the thing that I still think was being in the theater program in high school and then in college was such a great experience, even if I hadn't decided to do something like this, because you meet friends, you learn skills, you learn to communicate. It's something I highly recommend for people that are going to school in Framingham or Newton or any place where they have a good theater program.
It's amazing. It seems like you really enjoyed it.
I really did. And I think, have you ever had the chance to be in the school play?
Well, at my school that I went to from kindergarten through 8th grade, you're actually required to be in the school play every year, kindergarten through 6th grade. So I was in quite a few.
And do you suppose that maybe that was one of the things that gave you the skill set and the sort of lack of anxiety about public speaking that has you here today?
Yeah, I think it definitely helped in talking in front of large groups of people.
Because, one of the things that's interesting is my bachelor's was in psychology. And one of the things that was interesting is when they do surveys of what makes people anxious, what they're afraid of, what creates fear in them, the number one thing on most lists, most surveys, is not spiders or elevators or heights, it's public speaking. So the fact that you are all comfortable speaking in front of this camera and in public is a hugely useful skill that you will be able to call on throughout your entire life.
Yeah, thank you. It really seems very important right now, especially what we're doing as broadcasters. But let's move into a different topic. You obviously were a broadcaster on the news for a long time. So there is a case going on right now, the Rupert Murdoch case, which has gotten a lot of review on TV. But one station that hasn't covered it as much as other stations are Fox News. Now, how do you feel about kind of slanting journalism? How when sometimes some stations report on things they want to report on, but if they don't like the story because it doesn't help their image, they don't report on it. How do you feel about stations picking which stories they want to report on?
Well, one of the unfortunate things about most news operations is that news operations will very often have a kind of either unspoken or actually spoken policy about things you just don't cover. When I worked for Westinghouse doing Evening Magazine, they used to own WBZ, we knew that the Westinghouse stations were not going to be covering stories about problems at nuclear power stations, because Westinghouse at that time was one of the companies that helped make large nuclear power stations. It's the way it is. Fox, however, stands out from most of the others in the degree to which they tend to slant the news. There's a couple of very interesting surveys that were done by an organization out of the University of Maryland. And they found, in the run-up to the Iraq War, for instance, they, in doing some polling, they found that there were a number of widely held, demonstrably false beliefs that people had about the Iraq War and the run-up to it. And they were wondering, how did people come to have these false beliefs? So then they went back and they did another survey, and they asked people to self-identify what news channel do you listen to the most? What's your principal source of news and information? And then they went and correlated that with the degree to which people tended to have hold beliefs that were demonstrably false. One of the beliefs, for instance, was that the Iraqis had actually used weapons of mass destruction or chemical weapons on U.S. troops. And that was false. Didn't happen. And they found that people that listened to Fox News or watched Fox News on TV were it's either 4 or 5 times more likely to hold a demonstrably false belief than somebody that self-identified National Public Radio as their main source of news and information. So the real problem with Fox News, which is different from Fox Entertainment, is that they put things out there that are not just, it's not just what they cover and what they don't cover, it's that they cover things sometimes and say things that are demonstrably false about them. That's the greater danger. But I actually used to work for some of those guys that used to work with Rupert Murdoch. I worked on this show called Hard Copy, and the guys that I was working for at one point were guys that had sort of learned their craft with Rupert Murdoch on Fleet Street. And it was like working for pirates. You know, they sort of really didn't have rules. And they hired private detectives who would go out and do funky stuff to get information. And there was also a sort of wink and nod approach to corruption during the O.J. Simpson case. Remember that?
Yep, of course.
One of the earliest stories that they came across, which they never made public, was one of our ace reporters was approached by an LAPD officer, a Los Angeles Police Department person, who set up a meeting with our reporter at midnight behind a supermarket in Brentwood to show her some stuff he had for sale. And what he was proposing to sell to the hard copy reporter were the autopsy photos of Nicole Simpson and Ron Brown. He wanted to sell those photos for $1 million. And the reporter took one look at these and said, you can't put those on TV. I don't, this is, no, thank you very much. But we never reported on that story because one of the things that they knew was that would shut down their access to leaks from policemen or people that would tip you off on something or give you a little peek at evidence. But that was a very significant story because it showed that there were problems with corruption in the LA Police Department that had they addressed more forcefully early on, they might have had a different outcome in that trial.
Wow.